Hello, Brian. Are you there?
Hey, Andrew, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine. I see you have a camera. You don't actually need to have it on if you don't want to, but because I don't have a camera, this is audio, strictly audio. But great to have you on. I loved your Book of Man series. It was something else. I watched the first series twice, and the recently released Ascension series I watched once, but I think I definitely want to watch that twice. Um, I guess starting off with this interview, I'd like to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and how you got into this research that led you to creating that whole Book of Man series, and where you got it and all, and how do you know you can trust your sources, because that's really foreign stuff, and people are like, well, can't expect to talk about crazy stuff like that involving ETs unless you can validate your sources. So yeah, that as well, and also among other things, kind of interested to know why you decided to upload it on Vimeo and not YouTube when you could definitely get a lot more viewers on YouTube. I'm sure there was some reasoning behind that. So please answer that question as well. But you got your chance now to tell your life story, specifically from the Book of Man perspective and how you got into creating that and where your research came from. You got the floor.
Well, hey, Andrew, thanks a lot for having me. Glad to be here. The book itself um, has the information that was contained within the book's been collected over an incredible amount of time. Um, Basically, it was like a box of mismatched jigsaw puzzle pieces that didn't fit together. There was stories, there was bits and pieces of this and that. Just I mean, and these are just like one sentence, one paragraph out of a book, or out of an article, or out of a database listing, or out of a UFO contactee report. I mean, there's just all sorts of unique little bits and pieces scattered throughout a vast amount of time from a vast amount of locations. And and it wasn't until probably about, I'd say, 2000, sometime between 2007 and 2009, I had the opportunity uh, to actually get a chance to watch one of Alex Collier's lectures, one of his early ones. And I'm sitting here listening to him talking. And this is the freaky part, because I had been researching UFO material for decades, and I had never heard of Alex Collier before. How that escaped my realm of purview, I have no idea. But here I am sitting here listening to Alex Collier on a early YouTube video, and the things that he's saying, I'm going, wait a minute. I mean, there was, of course, there's some far-reaching aspects of Alex Collier's material that is fundamentally fascinating. Anyway, but here I'm hearing details from him that I already have in this big compilation of crap in boxes and folders and notebooks and filing cabinets. Um, and basically, where my stuff came from, uh, my father was in the military, so hence I was in the military. I grew up in the United States Air Force. Um, we were restricted to military installations because of what my dad did. And so I spent a lot of time in the military libraries. Now, I got to tell you something. I mentioned this briefly in a few places, but the resources that are in military libraries are not the same resources you get down at your public library or in your school library. Let me tell you. I mean, there's research documentation, there's historical archives, there are scientific and engineering uh, documentation, papers, publications, and I just ate this stuff up. But in the course of doing this over my youth, I was collecting, like I said, little bits and pieces of information. That it was one of those moments. You know, what is that for? Where did that come from? That kind of stuff. And actually, it had no bearing or any purpose whatsoever. Really, it was just interesting to me. Well, over the course of time, this stuff started piling up, and as our technology improved, my ability to get my hands on this information improved. Um, Once the advent of the computer came out, In the early days of the computer, I had one, and it was through that I was able to peruse independent servers scattered across the globe via a phone modem. You just logged into them. Nowadays, we call them forums or chat rooms, but basically it was an old bulletin board system. And there were files. People were just sharing this stuff. This is where I started picking up contactee reports. Now, when I say contactee reports, what I'm talking about is I'm not talking about the MUFON kind of crap you're hearing now. I'm talking about stuff from like South America and Europe and Asia, where somebody actually went out to the field and interviewed the people to find out what the hey happened. And there was a vast database located down in South America that I landed upon that had pages and pages of this stuff. And I just called out the bits and pieces that I saw that I thought were interesting, or I thought I'd recognized it from something else before. Well, anyway, speed back up to hearing Alex Collier. He's talking about things that he's experienced and he's witnessed, and like I said, it was a combination light bulb going off and ball bat to the forehead moment, because it dawned on me I already had some of this stuff already collected. So I started ripping this stuff out, throwing it on the floor, scattering it out, and over the course of about a year or so, these pieces started fitting together. And so what I've done basically is I've taken all of this information from all of these sources, and all I've done really, and this isn't very difficult, anyone can do this, all I've done is I've placed it in a linear timeline. And basically the story tells itself. I mean, this stuff, you don't have to make this stuff up. Now, as far as gaps in the timeline, in the original book, there's a vast amount of time that this covers, millions and hundreds of millions of years. And there are gaps in the timeline, there are gaps in the story, and if you've gone through the first book, like you've said, then you'll have noticed that there's this vast gap in time frames that, to me, basically means there's stuff that's happened that we have no idea what it is. There's stuff out there that we have yet to learn, and there's stuff out there that, we have no record of, we have no documentation for, or it was so thin it wasn't worth including. Let me put it that way. There is at the moment, there's a really big leaning towards this missing planet of our solar system, which is tied to the asteroid belt. And I'm really fascinated by that story, always have been, but I just could not find enough background information to actually include that story within this tale. And so, more or less, that was an editorial decision to pull that out and just not go over it, at least not until there's further information available. But anyway, the basic story, it talks about where the race of man came from, some of the races that are here in this galaxy, particularly in this quadrant of the galaxy, what has transpired over the course of hundreds of millions of years before we ever came into being. And these are source tales from a combination of sources from myth, folklore, legend, archaeological research, anthropological research, paleontology. I mean, there's a whole host of disciplines that cover different topics but have similar material that cross-checks one another. So basically, it's just a question of molding like clay, trying to get it to fit this story. And so where we're at now in the series is at the completion of the first book, I had already had enough material to keep going, actually. But I took about a year off to start formulating plans for the second book, and just halted the first book at about 12,000 years ago, which is when stuff started getting really dirty. And as if you've seen the start of the second book, the episodes for the Book of Man Ascension, you'll notice that it does have a considerably darker theme to it, because it's in a lot of ways it's a very sad tale, but in other ways there's some hope in there, and that's what we're shooting for, and hopefully that will bring you up to a little bit of speed, Andrew.
Yes, and if this is nobody's business but yours, by all means don't answer it. But I wanted to ask, why'd you decide to put on Vimeo and not YouTube, even though YouTube would get you a bigger audience?
That's not a problem. In fact, in support of a lot of Vimeo authors and filmographers, I've been a long-term member of YouTube, long-term member. I myself have been through the entire copyright screwing that we go through on YouTube, trying to find source material to use. And so after taking that beating, I've actually had some very pleasant conversations with lawyers from Paramount and Sony. And I decided at the time that because I don't have the resources or the background in animation, in graphics, special effects, in film studio work. Most of my practical experience is in editing, film and video editing, and so I was forced to have to use stills and acquired footage in order to put these together, and so I knew going in there's no way this is going to fly on YouTube. They'll pull the first one down within 8 minutes. And so I'm not going to invest a lifetime of work and energy into something like this that I know needs to be done. I know it needs to be put out in the public. And the choice for Vimeo actually was the last one, because I had already researched a lot of other video sites, and there's considerable other difficulties with some of the older other sites that were out there available at the time. But the thing that started me on the Vimeo track and doing this in a video production, when the book was completed in 2009, and I mean, there's literally a book, believe it or not. I had a few friends within the alternative media industry, and several of them pointed me in directions to go or where to go with this. And one man in particular, who was a published author, lecturer, just flat out told me, he says, here's my phone number, call me, we need to talk. And so, I mean, I was actually floored that he sent me his phone number. And Lloyd Pye and I sat on the phone for, I don't know, a couple of hours the first time just talking about this book, because Lloyd was very interested in it. He had already had some of his books published, and the discussion went that I was going to have trouble with this. He told me straight up, there is no serious publisher on this planet that is going to touch this book. Period. End of story. Don't even try. He says, I'm going to save you the door slamming in the faces. He said, because that's going to happen. And he pointed out some alternative publishers and some alternative publishing houses. On his recommendation, I approached every single one of them. No answers. No answers. Not even a go away, don't call me, boy. And I found that a little disheartening, actually. But, you know, pressing on. By that time, I had realized I'm going to have a lot of trouble getting this published. A lot of trouble. I mean, I've already been told to go self-publish. Well, that's good. You know, you still got to have $5,000 up front to walk into an indie self-publisher, and that's for hardcover, bond paper, the jacket, and then now you're talking distribution, agents, press secretaries, the whole 9 yards. So you got to have money up front even to self-publish. And at the time, I was out of work, still am actually, except for this, but. And then the worst thing that could have ever happened. And Lloyd Pye passed away. And as the only known staunch supporter of the book, it was like losing a best friend. It really was. I mean, that literally crushed me because not only did I respect the man and loved him to death, loved him like a brother. Um, his passing just basically almost killed this entire project. And so, over the course of a few months afterwards, I decided, okay, I'm not going to get this published. No one's going to see this. So I've already had years and years of videography and video editing. Screw it. It's going online and I'm giving it away. And so that's where I embarked on the first book on Vimeo. Now, Vimeo, I will be happy to say, was very cordial about this. I got help from several members on Vimeo about compression ratios and how to set up your editing, compiling and whatnot. I got help from the Vimeo staff. I mean, you don't get that crap on YouTube. You get nothing from YouTube. You're lucky if you get your channel on YouTube. So that was a clear cut choice. That wasn't even debatable. YouTube was out, and Vimeo was in. And to be honest with you, I'm happy I've been there ever since.
Well, if it works, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Keep with Vimeo if it works. I got a Vimeo too, but only because I've done a few contests where it's uploaded to YouTube and some other channel. But anyway, I digress. About your logo, the what appears to be someone giving a sign with their finger. What's that all about? Is that a boy or a girl? How old is that person supposed to be? And is it supposed to be a real historical figure that's in your avatar logo there that I used as the logo for this show?
Actually, that is a logo. It's just a logo. That's all. And the reason that I settled on that for a logo is because I've been told from both sides that that's a little boy, and other people have said that's a little girl. It's supposed to be non-gender, but the point of the signal, the shush, the thought came to me about, well, if this is such a big goddamn secret, the fastest way to get it around the planet is to tell somebody, shush, this is a secret. And I thought that's the perfect logo for this production.
I like that idea. That does make perfect sense. Make it clear that this is supposed to be a secret, so that'll encourage people to watch it. Getting into something you just said earlier, before we get to the Book of Man material, I heard you say you think MUFON is crap. Okay, I guess I can't really help but take a little offense to that because I go to the MUFON PA conferences every year, and there's a lot of valuable stuff they talk about. I mean, I've noticed there is a left-brain tendency with MUFON, not really willing to talk about spirituality or timelines and such, because there was this talker who was talking about, I believe that our visitors can't possibly be time travelers because of the grandfather paradox. And I'm thinking, oh, yeah, right. Does the phrase alternate timelines mean anything to you? You're obviously very close-minded. And of course, MUFON has been the word on the street is they've been infiltrated by NSA and CIA forces for whatever the nefarious reason may be, but that does not change the fact that MUFON still should be considered a benevolent group that has a wake-up humanity agenda. So, but they are nuts and bolts nonetheless, and that I see as a flaw. But anyway, why would you consider MUFON to be crap, as you put it?
Well, that may have been a harsh word. There's probably a lot more insensitive words than that, but I have had a very brief encounter with MUFON, and I've heard other people's experiences with MUFON. Yes, they are probably the best source of civilian collection of encounter, contactee, and experience information out there, only because they've got such a broad network. But and it's nothing to do with the people in the field. Don't get me wrong about that. I mean, the people, like you said, the people down in the field, that's nuts and bolts, man. Those people are just doing what they're out there to do. but it's the upper level management that I have serious questions about what they're doing with the information. I fed MUFON a report uh, probably about 6-7 years ago that I personally witnessed that involved military aircraft. And they had the local MUFON representative get in touch with me. The state leader or director of MUFON got in contact with me, mainly because it involved military aircraft. And the report was filed, uh, but that's it. Because there was no physical contact, physical evidence, video or still photography involved. This is just witness information. It basically got dirty shelved. And even though I can understand that paradigm within that organization, what I cannot understand is that no one's doing anything with this information. They're collecting it. Where is it going? What are they doing with it? Now, maybe other researchers have access to it to some degree. That I'm not aware of. I've tried looking through MUFON several times for supporting information for myself, actually. But I don't know. I just have this very uncomfortable feeling about MUFON just because of my very brief relationship with it. I thought it wasn't heavy-handed, but it was maybe a little too light-handed. I don't know. That's I guess that's a personal judgment call, a personal opinion.
Okay, fair enough. So now we got to get into the really nitty-gritty stuff. And well, the Book of Man, that like you can hear your voice as the stories are going along. Yeah, that all those videos on Vimeo, is that basically just you reading from the book to convert to a video form? Is that basically what it is?
Well, yeah, that's basically the first book
Mm-hmm.
uh, was completed, like I said, before the video production even started. So I had a working script, and the first, I don't know, 2-3 chapters of the book were literally straight out of the book. Some of the other chapters were so long that I had to edit them down for, commercial sake, if you want to call it that. But yeah, it's all coming straight from the book. In the new series, Ascension, um, I didn't have the capability to have the book completed before I started the film production because it would have taken maybe another 6 months to a year to actually complete the book before the video series started. And I had so many people just on me all the time. When's the next one? When's the next one? That I just it was a dice toss. I said, look, what I can do is I can just write the book a chapter at a time and then self-edit as I do the video production and try to get the script done before the thing goes up. And that's how the second book's getting done. So it's definitely a work in progress.
Well, it's been a masterpiece work so far as I'm concerned. And now I'd like you to give, for all those people that have never seen the series, and I would definitely encourage people to to watch the whole series. It's definitely worth it. Watch it twice for crying out loud because the information is deep. But I'd like you now to give an abridged version of the material in the Book of Man series for the sake of those, like I said, who have never seen it. And don't really worry about giving exact time. I mean, time is an illusion. Timelines can easily be off. That's perfectly understandable. But I'm more concerned about the sequence of events and the main ET groups involved, alliances also with ET groups and factionalizing within ET groups and that. Well, I'm sure you get the basic gist of it. Please give a nice abridged version. I'll say you got the floor, but since I do have some other questions, maybe try to keep this to an hour of, yeah, that means I won't be able to take calls at 7:15 like I originally said I would, but I think that's understandable with the material I'm asking you to go into. So if you want to call, I'll take calls at 7:35, I guess. So right now you got the floor. Give us a nice abridged version of the Book of Man Vimeo series.
All right, thank you, Andrew. I will keep it brief because I know you've probably got a lot more questions, and we can talk about a lot of this stuff. But basically, the Book of Man stems from a need to put out stories that exist, stories that are known of, stories that have spanned the course of time, even on this planet, and some before it. And so basically, it starts from the earliest known record of where a race of man appeared in this galaxy. And it's not here on Earth, sorry. It also speaks to their relationship with the races that were already here when they got here. And they came from somewhere else. There's a few races out there, documented, by the way, that aren't even from here, this galaxy. But anyway, they all had interrelationships for one reason or another, just like we do here on Earth with other countries and other ethnic backgrounds. It's the same as above as below. It's all the same. And these races had interesting alliances, interesting confrontations. And basically, this details the time span of the first appearance of man here in this galaxy, where they went, who they ran into, good and bad, and what transpired. And that's what basically sets up the players in the long story. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about Chapter 2 in the book because it refers to the Draconian Empire. And anyone who's followed any ufology or any UFO research is at least vaguely familiar with the word draconian. There's been a lot of mispronunciations of the actual race that runs the empire, but the empire itself is comprised of many races. It's like anywhere between 25, 50 different races scattered across the galaxy. And so there is no one specific identifying race that you can say, well, that's the Draconian Empire. They are either part of it. It's sort of like the United States. The United States is the country. Pennsylvania is just a state. It's not a country yet. So, but that's the same kind of thing that's going on with the empire. But anyway, they are the biggest interferers that we've had to deal with and are currently dealing with at this very moment. We'll be getting into a lot more of that in the upcoming episodes of this next series. But also, there are the races of Alex Collier is actually the only one who's actually named them. And so I went with his naming conventions on this because it made more sense to me. Rather than calling them grays, which I take an offense to. Grays is an ethnic slur because there are more than one race of grays. There are the 3 meter tall, 9 foot tall, who are called the Tao, and then there are the biological clones called the Doll, which are very similar to them because they created them. There's an entire backstory to all this. It's in the book. It follows right through the chapters how all this stuff came about. And at some point in time, the discovery of Terra in this story, Earth, the discovery was made by the Draconians. Point of fact. Even before man ever came here, before man was ever seen on this planet, the Draconians were here a long time ago. They have, at this point in time, it's just rumor, innuendo, and whispers right now. But there are underground bases on this planet, and they own many of them, by the way. But without going down that dirt road, the creation of man on this planet served a purpose for them, but there's an ulterior motive behind it. Of course, there always is. And there were a couple of different races involved with this. And once the race of man in this galaxy found out what was going on here, this is where things started to come together. This is where confrontation came to pass, basically. And since then, it has been like this nonstop ever since. And currently in the Book of Man Ascension, we are moving to a timeline now that is more relatively current. I started out the second book episode series back around chapter 7 of the first book because there's more detail that had to be covered. And so the prologue to the new series, Ascension, starts back in chapter 7. Actually, I don't suppose I made that very clear when I ran that, but and then trying to bring everybody back up to speed as fast as possible to where we are at the moment. Now, currently, the last chapter that was put up, Exhibit 4, Part 2, this was a rather busy chapter. It required two episodes, and because there's a lot of story in this. This brings us right up to the birth of someone whose name is synonymous with a lot of things on this planet. And so this is going to be a weighty chapter 2 coming up, Exhibit 5. But that's basically the story as it exists to this point. And I even mentioned in the postscript for the first book that the possibility exists that we stumble across new information or new archaeological records or new translations or new something which either adds or changes a piece of this story, and I'll be more than happy to go back and make that correction.
Well, that's great. A lot of people don't like to acknowledge that they were wrong, but hey, if acknowledging that you were wrong is for the benefit of awakening, then it's definitely a sacrifice worth making as far as I'm concerned. But I think your research is pretty spot on compared to what I've seen with other people in the field of ET influence on Earth research goes. But some of the choice of words that you used in the series, interesting how you chose to refer to Earth as Terra. I think you called Mars Mar. You called the Sun Sol. I mean, why use those words? Did you just want to sound professional, or was there a deeper significance behind using those words instead of the more down to earth, no pun intended, usages like Earth instead of Terra?
Oh no, and thanks for asking, Andrew. Actually, you're the first person to ask that question. There is a reason behind that. During the course of writing the first book, being somewhat of a layman language specialist, and having had to study a great deal of ancient languages and current and modern language and language migration and language idioms, dialects, what have you, words are very important to me, because they are our means of communication, despite what maybe mainstream media thinks the words are for. But I decided back then, because I noticed in researching some of the background information on star systems, constellations, and some other scientific data related to that, I was coming across multiple names. And it was at this point that I said, just hang on a minute here. I'm trying to keep everything within continuity here, and you guys are throwing a list of non-continual items from the field of science, by the way. And so when I started digging a little bit further, what I found out was that the original names of all the stars in our sky are Arabic. And they predate known Western Middle Age science by a considerable amount. And so I decided at that point that that's what the route I was going to take. I was going to use the original names for everything. And so Terra is actually the original name of Earth. I'm actually still digging into the fact of where the hell Earth came from. I'm sure there may be a couple of researchers out there who think they've pinpointed it so far, but I think if you dig a little bit further, you're going to be surprised. But yeah, Terra is the original name. Saul, the name Saul predates the Roman Empire. In fact, it predates Egypt, and that is the name of our sun. Um, the, and I explained this in the postscript. The reason that Mar was named the way it was is that I'm not entirely convinced at this point that there hasn't been some hanky-panky in language translations. For some reason, over the course of time, translating from let's follow the path from Sumerian to Greek to Latin to German to English, from French. I mean, you just start mixing in a whole bunch of languages. There's been horrendous amounts of mistranslations, word changes, word idiom differentiations. And it's like, wait a minute. Is it possible that some of the words that we come to use familiarly right now are completely wrong due to mistranslation? And I just took it upon myself at the time during the course of writing the book that this may have been closer to the original name of that planet than the one we're using right now. I'm still looking for it, but I decided to run with it.
Yeah, and speaking of choice of names for things, the Draconians, you refer to them as the Sea Car. That's what Alex Collier refers to them as in those presentations. I did also watch those great presentations he gave in the early and mid '90s. But you said, like, where did the Sea Car come from? Well, according to my number one most frequently used source of information on my show, Andrew Bartzis, the Akashic Records reader, he says there's 18 species of reptilian influencing our reality on Earth, and only one is malevolent. Although when I asked him, what are you talking about? Isn't there like bad reptilians from like Draco and Hydra and Sirius, that is an aquatic race, and also Orion? He said they're all clones of each other. They're all clones of the Alpha Draconans, but some people with a different point of view might want to refer to them as different groups rather than just one specific malevolent group. But does that in any way help you better understand this whole issue that you mentioned earlier about like who the Draco are and where they come from and everything?
Well, of course. I mean, there, like I said, there is still a vast amount we do not know, and you know, I'll be damned if I'm going to get up on a pedestal and say this is the carved in stone thing and everything else is BS. It's not going to happen because there's just too much we don't know. The stuff we do know, I can tell you could probably fit it on the head of a pin compared to the known universe, because there is so much going on. I mean, short of somebody, let's say, for instance, if there is a secret space program, if one of those guys comes forward and actually starts spilling his guts about what's out there and what's going on, that may be a new source for information. We don't know. I mean, there's just so much we don't know. And so, yeah, I mean, there has to be some supposition in it. I'll tell you this much. There is a story in the first book that details the battle between a tribe of man and the Draconians in this system. Now, in fact, there are observations, reports, and records that show serious damage to the surface of Mars. And there's been some other reports that have pointed out the fact that they're not entirely convinced at this point that the moons of Mars are originally Martian. I'll leave it at that. So, having learned that there was in fact a confrontation in this system at about this time, I had to follow logical pathways in order to complete the story. So that right there is probably the thinnest part of the book at the moment, but it's still a good story. It still fulfills the storyline, the intentions, the motivations, and the motives of everything that was going on at the time. And again, it was a logical progression. So yeah, the knowns and the unknowns. hey, they're killing us right now.
Well, don't worry about your difficulties understanding the nature of reality. I can assure you that mine are still greater. That's why I'm the host of Nature of Reality Radio, and all the more reason to have people like you as guests. But um, another thing you mentioned about that you're really not so sure about putting in the Book of Man series because you're not sure on the story, the whole thing about the asteroid belt. Now there seems to be two schools of thought on the asteroid belt that is uh, well, maybe it does resonate with mainstream science, maybe it doesn't. But one school of thought is the whole Marduk idea that there was a planet called, I shouldn't say Marduk, I should say Maldek, because Marduk, that's another name for Nibiru. But we'll get to Nibiru in a moment, too. And also Sitchin's work, because he ties into this as well, and I'll get into more in detail with Zachariah Sitchin's work later on. But anyway, some people, including ET contactee Brad Johnson, who channels the Dronist, say that a planet called Maldek was what is now the asteroid belt, and it was like Earth in many ways, but for reasons that don't think I really need to get into now because it's going to take up some time. It fell apart, the planet did, Maldek, and it became the asteroid belt. Now, those who follow the work of Zachariah Sitchin would say, no, that's not what happened. One of the planet Nibiru, also known as Marduk, moons, during one of Nibiru's orbits near Earth, collided with Earth, which was Sitchin referred to as Tiamat, and part of Tiamat became the asteroid belt. The other part became what is now the Earth. But there are some ideas that maybe that was a part of the tablets that Sitchin did not intentionally mistranslate, but maybe accidentally mistranslated. And the Maldek asteroid belt story is more appropriate, that it was an entire planet, not half a planet, like in Sitchin's case, a whole planet that somehow broke apart and became the asteroid belt. With that said, do you have any comments on this, since this was an issue that you've kind of dwelled on?
Sure, sure, not a problem. I mean, first of all, you have to stop and look at the asteroid belt in its entirety. Okay, we have this visual clue to the asteroid field every time they show either, an animation or concept animatic of the asteroids. You see this narrow little thing with a bunch of rocks in it. But on further examination, you're going to discover that the asteroid belt, which is literally a belt that follows the entire circumference of the solar system. This is freaking huge. It's huge. That's a lot of rock. And I'm sorry, that would have had to have been a big honking planet to put that much rock into this solar system in one continuous loop. And could another planet have come in and destroyed it? It's possible. It's entirely possible. It's also entirely possible. One story I heard was that there was a war that occurred at that time and the planet was literally blowed up. So, I mean, there's a whole handful of stories, and that's what I meant about why I left it out. There's such a conflict in stories about that more of it seemed like supposition than collating background information. So I opted out of including that story, at least until some more information comes about. But now, as far as Tiamat and Marduk and Nibiru are concerned, I don't have a big problem with Sitchin per se. I applaud him for his attempt. Let's put it that way. I hate to say out loud in public that I told you so, and I never did. But I had some serious doubts about Sitchin a long time ago because it sounded too good to be true. It really did. And the one thing that I'm going to have to point this out, my little niggly thing about words, the word Anunnaki. This has been a sore spot in my craw for decades. Okay, people sling this word around as if it's the name of a race. Well, I hate to tell everybody this, but it's not. Let me explain. Anunnaki is the English translation from Sitchin of a word pronounced by existing Terran humans. And the paraphrased translation of Anunnaki is they who came from the sky. Now, I don't know about you guys, but if I was one of them, I wouldn't call myself that. You see, the word Anunnaki is what we called them, but we do not know their name. So right there, I knew there's something hinky about this whole story, especially the way the word Anunnaki's been slammed around left and right. I mean, it's like every time I see it, I roll my eyes anymore. And as far as Nibiru is concerned, I'm neither on board nor off board at this point. There's just not enough data to support it one way or the other. I mean, there's arguments against it, there's arguments for it, and they're valid. They're both valid. And so until I see something from my own two eyes that convinces me that the scales of the balance tip one way or the other, I'm going to stay on the fence on that one.
Well, fair enough. Entitled to your opinions and your research and your own style. But with that said, I think there's a few things I'd like to bring up, and of course I'm going to ask for your take on it. But since you've mentioned this whole thing about the word Anunnaki being slung around like crazy, when I interviewed George Kavasilis, he tried to clarify the whole thing. He said the term Anunnaki does not refer to one race. The Anunnaki from Nibiru that Sitchin talks about are just one faction of Anunnaki. Kavasilis claims the term Anunnaki refers to a hodgepodge of different ET races who are the son of a universal geneticist entity known as Anu. And we'll leave it at that. But also this idea of whether Sitchin is accurate or not accurate. Well, it's a very highly contested issue, and there's good reasons why. First of all, Andrew Bartzis, I mentioned him, the Akashic Records reader, who I frequently use as a source because I consider his ability to read the Akashic Records an excellent way of almost assuredly getting the right answer to a question. He claimed in an interview with Lance White that he did back in 2013 that Zecharia Sitchin's first three books are very accurate, although his timelines are somewhat off. And when I first heard that, I was like, what? That makes no sense, because I remembered Leo Zagami, a 33rd degree Freemason, saying in his Project Camelot interview that Sitchin was a Illuminati disinfo agent who had a job of disinforming, like about the reptilians in the Illuminati. And David Icke said, David Icke in Revelations of a Mother Goddess, he interviewed Arizona Wilder, and Arizona Wilder said that she actually saw Sitchin shapeshift into a reptilian alien at rituals, satanic rituals that she was under mind control at, and she said his job was to disinform, and David Icke was like, well, that might explain why Sitchin warned me not to talk about reptilian aliens in my work. And when I met Andrew Bartzis at a conference, I brought this to his attention. I was like, okay, so how do you explain your statement Sitchin was accurate? Well, take a deep breath. We're going to jump off into the deep end here. Bartzis assured me that Zagami and Wilder, they were saying stuff that they thought was true about Sitchin, but they were actually saying disinformation about him being a disinfo agent. They were wrong. He was not a disinfo agent, but they believed it to be true because they were, at that time they said that they were under some sort of sophisticated form of timeline watcher, manipulation, mind control, and you'd have to ask Andrew Bartzis to explain this in detail in one of his talks, but he said they were on an alternate timeline, so they believed Sitchin was a fraud when he wasn't. So Sitchin, he was right, and there's a lot of attempts by the powers that be to discredit him because they don't want us to know that he's right about his work, particularly his first three books. So with that being said, does that in any way make you want to believe, okay, Sitchin deserves a lot more credibility, and did I help you in any way maybe clear up the confusion with the term Anunnaki?
Well, let me put it to you this way. I've said this before, and I'll say it again, is that there is no one person on this planet ever that has existed has all the information. There just isn't. I mean, we are all only given one piece of the information, okay? And on that basis, I'll give Sitchin credit for doing something that those idiots in the mainstream archaeology and science refuse to do. I mean, they had those tablets sitting in front of them for forever, however long they had them. Nobody had touched them. So Sitchin marched in there and he did it. Now, how correct is he? The jury's still out on that one. But I'll give him the benefit of the doubt at this point that there's a possibility that worst case scenario, he could possibly be 50% correct in all this. And if he's got enough of it correct, that, to my way of thinking, would basically set the powers that be off to put the kibosh on it. I mean, let's face it. You know, these are the guys that control information on this planet, period. So if they had the suspicion that there was any of this correct, yeah, discredit is very soon to follow.
Oh yeah, no question. And you mentioned about Nibiru. Thought I'd just throw this out for you. Mark Kimmel, recent conference I was at, Mark Kimmel spoke. ET contactee. He said his contacts told him that the Anunnaki's home planet of Nibiru recently self-destructed. Just thought I'd throw that out. But yeah, make of it whatever you will. But anyway, you did reference the what appears to be the Anunnaki ETs in your Book of Man series because, well, they appear in the history. There's got to be some significance behind that. But one thing Sitchin did leave out, and this was kind of suggested by the whole thing. David Icke said, well, why did Zachariah Sitchin warn me not to research reptilian aliens? Well, for whatever the reason, Sitchin might have wanted to leave that out of his work. But there is evidence, many would assert, that the Anunnaki from Nibiru and the Draco-Reptilian sea car, they did actually have an alliance with each other at some point in the past, and in some cases even interbred with each other. And that I wanted to ask, did you try to elaborate on that suggestion in the Book of Man that there was an alliance between the sea car and the Nibiru and Anunnaki?
Not at the moment, because there's at this point, there's, like I said, there's not enough background information on who these people were specifically. What I used in the Book of Man, the original, was a tribe of man, because even according to Alex Collier, whoever these people were or are, they were of the race of man. Now, if there's a negative compatibility there somewhere, then the possibility exists for sure that there was some sort of an alliance between the Draconian Empire and these people, or some of these people, in some way, shape, or form. There's like I said, there's a lot of conflicting stories. It's sorting through a fog with no flashlight and no roadmap. I mean, basically. So you have to basically pick your battles. You know, whether or not you win the war, that's another thing.
Yes, and speaking of wars, I do seem to recall in the Book of Man series hearing you talk about galactic wars. George Cavasos said that the so-called Orion Wars, the Star Wars Clone Wars, is actually meant to be a fictionalized form of soft disclosure, what the Orion Wars were really like. And I seem to recall you mentioned the Lyra star system in the Book of Man series, which is significant because it's been said that the Lyra system is where humanity is originally born. And I think I should point out that in a story, in a show I did by myself when I couldn't get a guest, I critiqued an article called Characteristics of ET Races. And the Lyra star system in that article, it had, there was a list of different races that come from the star systems, and it's Lyra, I believe, had the longest list, which would make sense if you believe what Alex Collier says about humans being genetic royalty, or a mixture of many different ET races. Well, consequently, it kind of makes sense that if Lyra is the birthplace of humanity, then it would only make sense that it would be a hodgepodge of different races, genetic races of ETs in Lyra. So, well, I'd like to get your take on that, but also from what you've seen in your research, could you maybe elaborate on what the Orion Wars were all about, and also how the Lyra star system factors into the whole Orion Wars saga storyline?
Well, I didn't cover the Orion Wars per se, not in that sense, because uh, the the story that I'm trying to get across here is basically the evolutionary story of the appearance of the race of man in this galaxy. And all of these players enter into it at certain times during the story. Um, and as close to the moments that they appeared as possible. Um, as far as an Orion War is concerned, I'm not entirely surprised at anything about that, because one thing that I am aware of, that there is a sub-alliance in Orion, even at this moment, very similar to the Draconian Empire. The Orion Alliance is made up of a handful of different races at starflight capability. And these races are nothing similar. Some of them are humanoid, some of them are uh, other forms, other societies. So it's possible that there was indeed, some form of warfare that occurred there at some point in time in their history that got them to where they are right now. And since that time, they've migrated. All of the races from Orion have migrated. I covered this in one of the chapters in the new book. That all the races from Orion have migrated. They're still there, but they've migrated colonially to Taurus, the Hyades, and the Pleiades. And I also wanted to say something about the Pleiades. There is a lot of talk about this benevolent race from the Pleiades, and I'm not going to say whom or what that story is about. I'm just going to point out the fact that you have to understand that there is no one system in this quadrant of the galaxy that has one single race in it. Not one. I mean, you pick any constellation in the northern hemisphere sky, you're going to be looking at anywhere between 10 and 50 stars. And within each one of those systems are planets, every one of them. And on every one of those star systems, there's going to be a race somewhere. So it's like saying the race from the Pleiades is sort of blinding, actually. Blindered, probably a better word. The Pleiades are like the crossroads of the galaxy. There are so many races in the Pleiades, it's like downtown LA right now there. So you have to be careful, really careful about what information you cherry pick out of the Pleiades. That's all I'm going to say about it.
And a lot of people who hear you say this would probably say, what are you talking about? Lots of life in the Pleiades. The Pleiades stars, they can't support life. Well, let me tell you something, folks. We've been totally lied to about a lot of things in astronomy. Stars, among other things, aren't powered by nuclear fusion. I mean, they are either electromagnetic, or they have a large amount of scalar energy. But there ain't no nuclear fusion going on. Well, maybe there is a slight amount of nuclear fusion somewhere on that big ball of, which is not gas, but energy of some sort. And to suggest that a planet has to be in the so-called Goldilocks zone to support life is being way too conservative in regards to how many ET races there potentially are out there. But switching gears a little bit, Book of Man, you call it. Some would say, well, what do you mean by man? I mean, what race? I mean, there's. Are you talking about Neanderthal? Are you talking about Cro-Magnon? Or are you talking about what is a combination of Homo erectus and Anunnaki, as Sitchin supporters would say? Well, could you clear up exactly the evolution, so to speak, even though evolution is not real according to what Darwin says? Darwin's a fraud. Could you elaborate on what exactly the evolution of man is, as told in your in the Book of Man series?
Well, sure. And if a watcher or viewer or listener can't really make this connection, the entire book is just simply that story, the story of where man came from and how we got here. There's no spontaneity to it. There is no, uh, there is no, a race appeared here out of thin air by accident because of nature. This does not happen. Okay. Um, the races of man, and when I say the races, it's plural. There's not just one race of man in this galaxy. Uh, I refer to them as tribes in the book. That's where the original word tribes came from, just so that you know. Because each one of these individual races of man are individual tribes of the race of man. Man is not just a naming convention. It is who they are. It is who we are. Just like, let's say, for instance, you cross a lizard with a lizard, you're gonna get a lizard. End of story. It's the same thing. Basically, these races have been migrating and colonializing for millions of years. And so the timeline that brings them to this point, um, how we are here, we are of them. We are part of them. We are part of a lot of other things too. No, granted, when you start mucking with DNA and genetics, all you got to do is see the latest and greatest out of DuPont to know that you twitch the wrong way and you get an unicorn that's blue. So, um, but yeah, the race of man, and it doesn't matter which one you want to include in that. Uh, According to the best sources I've seen so far, and believe you me, I looked at the documentation, I looked at the research, I looked at those anthropological papers until my eyes bled. That trying to find the missing link between Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, modern man, any other deviant genetic thing out there that's an oddity like the hobbits or the Denisovans or anything else. We're all still coming from the same place originally. So since there is no concrete direction on that pathway for us, I just took the liberty of just forwarding the theory that we were all produced at the same time. That the Cro-Magnon or Neanderthal, whichever way you want to go with it, and us were created at the same time. We were chosen in favor of them. They were removed. Period. Now they're saying, of course, this is science mainstream I'm talking now. They say that we just basically killed them off or starved them to death because we took over their prime, quote unquote, hunting grounds. But now we're coming across new research that's showing that they could have literally kicked our ass. I mean, tore us to shreds. They were bigger, they were stronger, they were faster, they were smarter. They were smarter a lot sooner than we were. So, for some odd reason, I don't know. There's so much discrepancy to historical science. It's almost as laughable as historical Christianity. And don't even get me started on that.
Okay, I won't. But you mentioned earlier the whole thing about what happened to Earth 12,000 years ago. Different schools of thought on this. Mainstream science would assert that, about 12,000, 13,000 years ago, horrible catastrophe on planet Earth coincided with the last galactic alignment before the 2012 galactic alignment, although that would have been summer solstice about 13,000 years ago. And they assert great cataclysm on Earth, end of an ice age, among other things. However, I read Michael Tsarian's book, Atlantis, Alien Visitation, and Genetic Manipulation, and while I do not resonate at all with Tsarian's assertion that Atlantis and Lemuria existed at the same time, I do think there's a lot of other things in that book that do deserve some credit, and there is evidence he puts forward that there never actually was an ice age, that mainstream science and mainstream history told us about an ice age existing prior to 13,000 years ago to conceal the idea that there was a very advanced civilization such as Atlantis on the Earth at that time. Now, I've talked to some other people about this, and they say no, there is plenty of evidence that Ice Age came to an end. But with that said, are you of the camp that believes that Ice Age came to an end, or the whole Ice Age thing is just a lie, as Michael Tsarian asserts?
I think at this time, and they're starting. It's just now starting to become evident in some of the announcements and research that we're coming across, even on a day-to-day basis. So I'm starting to lean towards the possibility that that is when the literal pole shift happened. There was, at some point in time, there had to be a literal pole shift where, and there's a school of thought about this, that at one point in time the continent of Antarctica was literally located on the equator. The entire planet basically flipped, 90 degrees. Put Antarctica on the southern, extreme southern end of the globe. So I'm starting to lean that way. Which, if you stop and think about it, if there was in fact an ice age, and there was a pole shift, that would explain the sudden dissipation of such an ice sheet, not because of advanced solar activity, but because of a pole shift. I mean, you suddenly dump a semi-tropical continent on the extreme south end of the globe. Yeah, they're going to get some ice, and vice versa. Anything that had ice on the other side to begin with, you flip it up, off she comes. It works the same way. So that's kind of what I'm leaning towards at this point. But there's just not enough evidence to call it one way or the other.
Well, in regards to Antarctica, it seems to be popping up a lot more in conversation in both mainstream and alternate sources, the continent of Antarctica, not only because people like John Kerry and Buzz Aldrin are visiting it, but also because Ancient Aliens, among other sources, did a episode on it, talking about how there seem to be pyramid-like structures on Antarctica. I mean, Ancient Aliens, they speculate so far out crazy they can get away with putting something like that on TV without the powers that be deciding, let's censor this and keep it off the air, because they know a lot of people, being paradigmatic and stupid, are just going to dismiss it as being ridiculous. But I think the show Ancient Aliens deserves a lot more credit than people give it, because it does have the potential to wake people up. And there is definitely something to the idea that those structures on Antarctica are man-made or ET made. And Brad Johnson, who channels Adronis, he did say in one of his recent talks, some parts that you see on Antarctica that have those pyramids, those were parts of the continent of Atlantis. But that's not to say that the continent of Antarctica is the lost continent of Atlantis. It just means that by some confusing, strange mechanism of consciousness, parts of Atlantis, rather than sinking into the earth like the whole Bimini Road situation is, sink into the ocean and such, it somehow ended up as part of the continent of Antarctica. With that being said, do you have any statements about how Antarctica factors into the whole Book of Man series?
Not at this time. It's too soon to tell, to be honest with you. I've got theories, sure. I've got buckets of theories, but nothing worthy of inclusion yet until I can stumble across something that convinces me that there's something to it. I don't doubt that there's not something down there. The sudden flurry of activity of world religious leaders flocking down to Antarctica. I mean, you can't make that shit up. There's something going on down there. So, yeah, there's something to it. There's got to be something to it. There's stories coming out of Antarctica almost every day, if you dig for them, of bizarre nature. And so, again, it's like a shopping trip. Your cart's not full till you pull up to the cashier. So, it's basically just a fishing expedition at the moment, especially for me, for this. But that's not to say that some stupendous thing might not come up in the near future that will put it, to the dead center of focus. And as far as Atlantis itself is concerned, there is just not enough background information to even lay a claim to what it is or where it is. It's still a ghost of mythology at the moment. It's a solid ghost, but it's nonetheless it's a ghost.
I guess the same would definitely be true with Lemuria as well. But also, switching gears again, one group of ETs or entities, whichever word makes more sense, that you referenced. I don't know if you mentioned this in the Book of Man, but definitely in the Ascension series, there was a group that you referred to as the Nine, and who had a very big stake in the affairs of what goes on Earth and probably a lot of other places in the cosmos for that matter. So this group of the Nine, who are they, what are they, and how do they factor into our lives in the past, present, and the potential future? I can't hear you. You're
Sorry, I was muted.
okay. Now I can
Um,
hear you.
I can go ahead and give up a little tidbit about what's coming because I mean the groundwork's already been laid for basically what this group is and what they're involved in. Um, there's been a lot of stories from both sides of the aisle of both science and religion, um, of a dark force on this planet, and there have been literal references to nine entities or nine people or nine somethings, and at the moment I've given them semi-human qualities only because I have yet to see any evidence that would lead me to think that these were off-world beings to begin with. You got to remember what's going on here. The races that are involved are hands off. This is a hands off business. Um, Many people have already conferred this, that there is a non-intervention, non-intercession related to all of the races that are whooping around us at this time, and that includes the ones who are mucking with us the worst. But they have sort of within covert subterfuge are trying to maintain their dominance here. Let's put it that way. And these nine people, I'm just going to call them people for now, just for an identifier. These nine were handpicked by the Orion leadership that was here a long, long time ago. It's not to say that these persons are immortal. That over the course of time, they have established basically a foundation of nine families, and these families have been in control the whole time. This goes way back before 1947, let me tell you. Uh, the deal that was made, it's back there. It's probably somewhere between 5 and 12,000 years ago that this deal was made. And of course, you know, if you put a human in this position, being handpicked by an off-world race to rule this planet by any means necessary, and being given great wealth and power to do it, man, you know, you pull some, you know, grog out of a cave and slap, you know, a bag of gold on him and give him a gun and tell him to go for it, he's going to go for it. So maybe through misdirection they agreed, and basically they've turned into traitors of the human race because they've sold us out. And they've got no qualms about this. They're getting rich, they're getting fat, and they're getting lazy. But the time is approaching where this power that they have is old. It's an old power. It's old school. And part and parcel of this ascension process that this second book is about is the fact, and you'll discover this as we go, is that we're waking up to this. I have been for some time. You know, there have been people throughout time who have just put their foot down and said, hey, wait a minute. There's something wrong here. It's terribly, terribly wrong. And so this has been ongoing for some time. It's just getting more intense right now because it's becoming more widespread. But Yeah, their stuff is starting to run out of gas. I mean, the old tricks worked back when they were new, but now they're old and we know them. So they're not quite as powerful as maybe they thought they were. That's just hypothetical supposition on my part. But yes, this group of 9 is definitely problematic. This is who I would like people to refer to as the they, the powers that be, that unknown, mystical, dark shadow force on this planet that no one could seem to put a pin on yet. Everybody may climb up over the fence against the Rothschilds or any of the bankers or the political power families. Ladies and gentlemen, those are puppets. They're all puppets. They always have been. They always will be. The real people behind the curtain, pulling the strings, those are the 9. And there's 9 families, and I've already outlined their organizations, how they work, what they do. And in the coming episodes, I am going to draw out basically a map. I guess we have to go to audio visuals in some cases for some folks, but I'm going to draw out a map about how this works, and hopefully it'll clarify it to some extent. Now, pinpointing a name, I haven't found it yet. I haven't found any inkling of who these people are. There's a lot of information out there about the pathway to them, but that path disappears, and they have done a very good job of hiding it. So that's going to take a little work on everybody's part, I can tell you that. You muted?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Now I was muted. Huh, what goes around comes around. Okay. Anyhow, this group of 9, and what they are and everything, and why the number 9. This makes me think of a couple of other numbers, in particular of high power entities that are running the show. Andrew Bartzis, in his talk with Lance White, said that a lot of the problems that appear on planet Earth, including the whole Illuminati control system of domination control and everything that goes with it, that was put in place by entities he referred to as 15 beings. And he said that at some point in Earth's history, the 15 beings was reduced to 6 beings because the 6 that were still with us, all the rest of them that are not with us, they all underwent service to self-ascension. And one might wonder, how can you undergo service to self-ascension? Don't you have to be service to others to undergo ascension? Well, apparently not. This was a whole entire new experiment of sorts, Bartz has said, and these 15 beings underwent it. And also George Kavaslis, he said that he once was in a roundtable of sorts, roundtable meeting with what he calls the 6 Lords of Darkness, which he said are a conduit for all the bad things that go on the earth. And I kind of makes me wonder, is this the remaining 6 beings that did not undergo service to self-ascension that Andrew Bartzis talks about? Very important question. I can't help but wonder, how could the answer to that not be yes? I'm sure they're the same entities, but that raises a question. Okay, right there you got 6, but you're talking there's a group called the 9. If these are the first 6, then who could the other 3 be? Or are we talking completely different groups of entities here? Do you have any comments on this?
I'm not so sure about the 15 or the 6, to be honest with you, because I have not, unfortunately, followed those people, and I'm not familiar with those numbers or where those numbers came from. The reason that I arrived at 9, there's historical record for it. There's a commonality within the secret mystic sects of Old Kemet, Old Egypt, that follows an organizational structure of 9. This has been long running in Egyptian history and pre-Egyptian history, by the way, that some of these cults and sects have a hierarchy of 9. It's 3 groups of 3, and there's a reason for that too. It's You could refer to it as the unholy trinity. There's a lot of names you can apply to this. There is for lack of a better word, it's perfect, and this is why the Egyptians adopted it, because there's a mythical and a mystical basis to the organizational structure of having 9, and so. I mean, at the time, I think there was some actually. I've seen some articles by certain alternative presenters and lecturers that were stating about the 13 families. Well, now we got another number in the mix, 13. It's entirely possible that there are 13 families out there that are running the show, but again, they're just the puppets. They're not the trigger pullers. They're just there. You know, if excuse my language, if the shit hits the fan, they're the ones that are going down, not the 9. Let's put it that way. So, in trying to clarify exactly who this group is and who these people are, I am hopefully setting up the groundwork for further research into exactly who and what these people are. And believe me, it's an ongoing job because, again, we're getting new information almost every day about different aspects of this. So, as far as a small group of this organization ascending, I think that's the wrong choice of words myself. I'm just going to say that. There's no possibility they could ascend. None. Absolutely none. It's sort of like, they've already Darth Vadered, man. They've already gone to the dark side. They are in. They are locked in. They're not getting out. They're not getting off this planet. They are done. So maybe they descended. Let's put it that way.
Well, I got problems with the word ascension too, because you're not really, when you undergo ascension, is all the like new agey folks, probably should have used the word metaphysical. New agey is not appropriate to use there, but metaphysical folks, they often say don't use ascension, because ascension is that implies you're moving above something, but you're really, when you expand your consciousness, you're not moving above anything. You're just moving closer to the point of infinite consciousness, moving closer to infinite consciousness. No ascension is going on there. But hey, the word's stuck, so when you use it, it's okay. People know what you're talking about. But in the Ascension series, there seemed to be a lot of stuff you talked about regarding Alexander the Great, and I want to get into this because it seemed like you were suggesting that Alexander the Great seemed to have good intentions because, among other things, the 9 were scared of him. And that seems to fly in the face of what some researchers like David Icke have said, that Alexander the Great, his job was to expand the Illuminati empire across the world, and even suggested that Alexander had direct ties to the Draco reptilians, like he was referred to as Serpent. Not to say he was a reptilian alien, but there were connections, Ike would assert. And I remember Ancient Aliens, there was an episode where they said the reason Alexander the Great and his minions and his troops decided not to move any farther than India, well, they wanted to go further, but they didn't because some sort of a close encounter object of sorts, close encounter, scared them, and so they decided, okay, let's not go any further, that's it. But that, like I said, your idea that the 9 would be scared of Alexander the Great flies in the face of the idea that Alexander the Great's job was to expand the Illuminati empire in his time. So, any comments?
I would like to openly debate that topic with anybody, and I'll give you my basis for this. I've seen the literature that goes in that direction, that he was in fact an instrument of that group, of the 9, of the Illuminati, whomever. And believe you me, I looked at it. I looked at it long and hard, because if it was possible it was true, well, I wanted to tell that story. I don't care, really. But you know what? There was one tipping point that said, I don't think so. Because this organization, this group, they are nothing but lies. They are to destroy. They're here to cause pain, suffering, stupidity, ignorance, ego, self-serving. I mean, the worst of the worst. But Alexander did one thing in his entire life that just tipped the balance the other way for me, and that's the library at Alexandria. Now, why, if he was in fact going to destroy the known world for the nine, would he have literally chased them down? Most of the book, just so that you know, most of the books that were in the library in Alexandria came out of the vaults of Amenhotep's temple. Just so you know. Those books were taken away from the known world and hidden in Amenhotep's temple in Egypt. And he tore that sucker open and ripped all those books out of there and opened up a forum for public consumption. That is not the evidence of a destructive, hateful, evil power to me. To me, that is a justified direction going in the face of that. And so now you start looking at what he did and how he did it. The story that I put up in that chapter, and that's the biggest part of that chapter, by the way, the story of Alexander from birth till death, is the course of everything that occurred during his life was solely directed at the acquisition of information. He wanted to know what the hell was going on. Because everywhere he went, he was learning things he had not been told about. And, shoot, he had the military power behind him. Well, let's just go find out. And he did. I think there may be more supportive information for that course of the story than the anti-Alexander story.
Okay, you mentioned the Library of Alexandria. Now, this is a interesting subject. Since you brought it up, might as well bring it up in conversation. I remember Andrew Bartzis in one of his talks talking about how the Library of Alexandria was destroyed as a result of what I think could be referred to as some sort of a mini timeline incursion, where on one hand you had like groups of ETs like the Syrians, Arcturians, and the Anunnaki and wars and gold mining operations that Sitchin talks about, and on the other hand you have the whole thing with Alexander the Great doing what he does on planet Earth. I don't know. It was a while ago when I heard this, but the idea that the library was destroyed had to do with a timeline incursion. Now, based on what research you've undergone, can you offer any comments of a more down to earth nature of why the Library of Alexandria was destroyed, and maybe the spiritual folks can hear what you say and say, okay, maybe there is some timeline incursion factor going on in that thing.
As far as timeline incursion, I mean, the possibility exists of timeline incursion throughout history. That's an entirely different topic, to be honest with you, because what you have to understand is the races that have been coming here for millions of years, in order for them to do that, they literally have to cross time and space. They're not flying here in a Chevrolet, okay? The craft that they come here in can jump time and space. And so it's entirely possible that they have the capabilities of time slip and timeline incursion, whichever way you want to call it. Now, as far as the Library of Alexandria is concerned, the only two existent states of that library was its original activity of a vault and a wealth of knowledge and information, art, science, mathematics, engineering, everything. Everything was in that library. And then its non-existent state where it was utterly destroyed. I don't know. That's not quite a dice toss to me. That right there tells me that, they put that in place to share the knowledge with the rest of mankind. Somebody else went in there to destroy it and get rid of it. That's pretty cut and dried to me.
Well, yeah, I guess it is pretty cut and dry, and like that idea that maybe in one hand it's like a vault of information, on the other hand it's destroyed. That kind of reminds me of what some of us heard, that like Puma Punku is in another timeline. It's actually a bustling little mini metropolis of sorts with high tech information. But when you look at it, it's just a flat out destroyed area of high tech stuff, which shows like ancient aliens would assert as good evidence of ET involvement. And by the way, I just want to point out, I see some people in the chat room here saying don't watch TV unless you want entertainment. And I haven't watched TV in over 15 years. Hey, some TV shows are okay to watch for awakening, like Ancient Aliens and UFO Hunters and Hangar One before it got canceled. Yeah, not all TV is brainwashing. It does have the ability to wake some people up. So just thought I'd throw that out. But hey, I'm more of a YouTube and Vimeo guy, so that's what you really should use to wake yourself up. But I'd like to ask you about how this factors into our present time, because in the Ascension series, getting into later on in the series, um, did talk about how our reality is in some way being affected in the present day by everything that happened in the past. So, based on what you're seeing with like Trump about to become the new president and who could be controlling the politics on planet Earth in the present day, could you talk about briefly summarize what like the Ascension series said in regards to the present day and how all the past stuff before then factors into it?
Well, it's coincidental that you should ask that because if you watch the series from start to finish, you will notice some coincidental similarities in things that happened in the extreme past with things that are going on right now. That is not coincidence. Um, my my favorite part of the first book is chapter 4 because that tells the story about the tribe of man called the Norman who migrated off on their own and started their own colonies. But what happened to them is happening to us right now. And anyone who's got at least, half a dozen functioning brain cells is going to pick up on that right away. Because here was a very philosophically centered tribe of man, high technology, brilliant, dedicated, and yet they were infiltrated and messed with by whom? The Tao and the Doll. And their society just flipped over on its head through corruption and misdirection, just like ours has been. So the precedent has already been set. And by the way, there are more than one sources for that story. So if there's a similarity going on in the universe that can be at least identified and can be related to what we're seeing and experiencing right now, then the possibility exists that, yes, things in time do repeat. Maybe not so much literally like time loops or what have you, but the fact that these technologically, spiritually, and knowledgeable, accelerated and advanced races throughout the galaxy are going through the same exact things we are, then that's not so much something to look up to, is it? That should change one's perspective about their viewpoint of quote unquote ETs or off world entities. Yeah, they may have some, great craft, great technologies, great information, but at the end of the day, they suffer the same garbage we do because they live in the same reality we do. We're fighting the same foes. We've got the same problems. And so part of this story is either how to get out of it or fix it. And I think in the long run, those two things are one and the same, fixing it and getting out of it. And so we're going to be exploring that over the next several chapters.
Look forward to seeing it without question. But now I want to talk a little bit about certain groups that you did mention earlier, some sort of a race from Orion. George Kavaslis in not my interview with him, but my private session with him, and actually in my interview too, he did mention something about 3 layers of influence on Earth, and he mentioned one layer he referred to as an Orion Nordic layer the Orion Nordics, a group of Nordic and reptilian ETs who seem to have an angelic quality, do have a little bit of an agenda that's not always in the best interest of humanity. Wondering if by any chance this Orion Nordic race, which Kavasilis seems to give a lot of significance to, is there anything in your Book of Man research that ties into that?
Actually, yes, there is. There's not many, but there's a few stories which came from different sources of a similar enough nature to be able to build some foundational background information. And I brought this up at the very beginning of the first chapter of the first book, is that when they first appeared here, something happened to them. And this was in Orion, by the way. This is where all this took place, the beginning of the first chapter. And the races either migrated or fled Orion for Lyra. There's not enough supporting information to define what it was that happened, but something did happen there. But there was a tribe of man who stayed behind. And we're going to be exploring that too, coming up soon, because they're going to re-enter the picture. They, in order to live there, in order to stay there in that set of systems with those people, those races, they literally converted sociologically to their form, which is not the best of intentions. I mean, let's call it what it is, you know. You want to call them evil, fine, you know. But let's just say that they don't have our best interests at heart. So there is a commonality there, that there are races of man who aren't playing ball technically, if you want to call it that. Just like in the last chapter I just put up, there's actually a race that was part and parcel of the Draconian Empire that seceded from the Empire to start their own colony completely. And I've got some background information on them that I'm going to be putting into the book coming up, because they are directly involved here now. And I know it's going to start getting confusing, because here you've got, you know, the tribe of man good, the tribes of the Seacar bad, but now we've got a tribe of good reptiles and a tribe of bad men. I mean, you know, it just like here on Earth, things are not as always as they seem.
Right, and just wanted to point out, David Icke in his books did talk about a sort of like a Nordic race of ETs that he referred to as Aryans. He said the African people called them the Mazungu. Kavasilis, in my session with him, he says that the Aryans, those ETs that Icke refers to, are actually Orion Nordics. And they did work with the Draco reptilians. Just thought I'd throw that out. But another group of ET races, for lack of a better word, ET. I think maybe time traveler, simply just saying time traveler is better, because Alex Collier, you said you got a lot of research from him. He says that he was told that some of our saviors and heroes, so to speak, were actually time travelers who came from the future, from a negative timeline in the future, and they figured, well, maybe some way to resolve the karma of being in a bad timeline, I suppose, was to travel back in time to our timeline to make sure that we didn't screw up and go on the timeline that they came from. Now, people who study the work of time travel and timelines would assert that these ETs that traveled back in time, that Collier refers to from the future to our time, that they're not able to fix their own time, because by going back in time to our timeline, they're disconnected from their timeline. So whatever we do is not going to fix the timeline they came from. They just figured they should do it because they owe an obligation for screwing up, I guess, in their reality, in their future timeline, which was a catastrophic timeline. But have you, by any chance, looked into this and suggested anything that maybe Alex Collier, what he was told is true? Time travelers from the future are trying to save us, and they're somehow traveling from their time to our time to fix this.
Well, the possibility is definitely there, because I don't know if you've looked into this or not, but there has been a massive a time issue has surfaced here in the last several decades. There's differences in memory. There's differences in recorded history from experienced history. And the only explanation currently on the table is a timeline change. If that's correct, then everything Alex Collier said may be true because, again, they can't fix it. They just want us to see to it that we fix it here and now. It's entirely possible that the powers that be, the whomever, whatever the ones I refer to as the nine and their minions, actually did perform a timeline transfer somehow, some way. I mean, you and I didn't do it. We didn't sign up for that. But it's entirely possible that, in fact, somebody did come back and say, hey, no, you ain't going to do that. And so it's entirely possible, and it's definitely worth exploring.
You know, one other question I would have is how did those people that came from the future, how could they make sure that when they traveled back in time that they actually got on our timeline and maybe not on some other timeline? Well, actually, I did sort of talk about this, that's very subject with Andrew Bashaga when I had him on my show. Just thought I'd throw that out for anybody who might want to try to understand how this deep, dark secret of time travel works. Many would say that the biggest secret within government, well, not really a secret because people know about it, it's just secret because they try to keep it under wraps, is ET and UFO stuff. No. It's actually the whole time travel conspiracy and everything that goes with it that many should probably consider to be the deepest, darkest secret within the government and the powers that should not be. But that
Well,
being said,
let me jump back in real quick on that because there, if you stop and think about it for a second, if you suppose time, there, let me see how to word this. There was a line in the film at the end of the film Lucy that the basically the fabric of our reality, the common denominator, the spending cash, so to speak, of this universe is time. That's, you know, forget gold, forget money. Time is the legal tender of the universe. And if that's true, then the acquisition of time manipulation is like, hey, you don't like what's going on? I can fix it, that kind of thing. And it's possible that someone or something somewhere at some point in time has actually succeeded. I mean, we already know the only possible way to traverse the distances in this galaxy is not by standard propulsion engines. It's impossible. Everybody would be dead you were going to see. So you have to literally jump time and space to get here or to get there, either way. So we're talking about time manipulation already just in transportation. So if that technology exists for a fact, then the ability to utilize that in alternative methods, you know how we do on this planet. Some guy invents something lovely that takes care of the planet, and by the time the Defense Department gets their hands on it, there's 1 million people dead in Africa. So the manipulation of technology in that manner, I can completely see it.
I could see it too. Just look at the Back to the Future movies. The antagonist, Biff Tannen, not an accident. He looks just like Donald Trump and becomes the president in our time. Not an accident that they said the Chicago Cubs win the World Series for the first time in 108 years. That just happened this past November. So there's forces in Hollywood that have connections to the government's time travel conspiracy. Case in point. But anyway, I digress. We have 6 minutes left on the show. Two things I want to discuss. One, gray aliens, and then after that, like you to get out anything you like, specifically the future of the Book of Man series. But gray aliens, you mentioned two different races, the Doll and the Dow. Maybe I pronounced that incorrectly. You could correct my pronunciation. But there's obviously a lot more gray races. I mean, John Lear, in my interview with him, he said, yeah, there's different gray races, but as far as what the research he's obtained, they're all like robotic, all a mix between like a computer and a plant. But they take orders. They don't really do things themselves. That they can easily be controlled because they're like robots. And then there's also like the Zulu shaman that David Icke's friends with, he said there's a group of gray aliens called the Pinky, which are actually a pink-skinned reptilian race in a gray alien jumpsuit. And also, we're talking, there's actually very high intelligent grays. As a matter of fact, the Serpo grays that Ray Kusalanda talked about coming from the Serpo system. They are extremely intelligent, he says, and that flies in the face of the stereotype that grays are bumbling aliens that take orders and have like no soul and no heart for all intents and purposes. So different groups of gray aliens. How many groups does your research suggest there are? And you can't really explain how they're all influencing reality in the 4 minutes we have left. But as far as the many different groups, any comments?
Yeah, the one thing that I am absolutely certain of is that regardless of which batch of grays you want to talk about, and literally you can use that word, batch of grays, because that's what they are. They're batches. They are bioengineered organic life forms. One of the stories, actually, from Alex Collier was that the origins of the grays millions and millions of years ago, the little guys, the little ones, I'm talking about the doll, they actually existed as an independent race at one time. Then the Dow come in, the tall 9-foot runners of the whole show. They came in and bioengineered them because their genetic failings, they've reached a point where their opportunities to continue their species are failing. Their species is dying. And so they utilized this race to propagate their species. That's why there's so many of them. And they're not doing a very good job of it because they each have sets of defects. Okay? Even with the ancient and advanced technology that the Dow have, they still mess up. And we're seeing different batches of the same thing, the same attempts to try to manipulate their own species. So they're not just in the business of mucking with us. They muck with themselves. Something terrible. And though these are viable organisms, all of them, personally, I lean towards the fact that there may be some mind control issues with the grays, the small ones, the dolls, because there's been stories that these were built solely for walk-ins, if you want to go to this esoteric level of this discussion, that they were built solely to contain the consciousness of another species temporarily until they find them a new place. They're like holding patterns. That's a possibility too. I'm sure there's other people who can speak more to that. But there are, as far as numbers, I couldn't even begin to guess. I wouldn't even try to guess. It's like it's easier to refer to them as one species, even though they are different. They are the same species, just like us. Look at us. We've got different ethnic backgrounds. We've got different skin tones. We've got different hair types. We've got different eye colors. We're all different. So it's, how can we all be called the same when yet we know we are? It's the same thing for them. They have subtle differences too, but they're the same thing.
Fair enough. All right. We're obviously going to go a little past 8 o'clock. Nothing wrong with that. But just for the sake of all the listeners who have lousy attention spans, let's try to keep this to a 2-hour interview. And on that note, I'll let you finish up anything you like, and also the future of the Book of Man series, and how long do you expect the series to go? Is it going to be something maybe you do to the day you die based on the research, or is there a certain point where you're going to say, I think I've done enough, let's stop at this point in terms of chronology? So finish up for us, please. Take us out.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. I appreciate it. And thank you for having me on tonight, too.
You're very welcome.
It's been fun. It's been loads of fun. But currently, I'm working on the next episode. In order to bring this thing forward, the story's getting more complicated every chapter. Right now I'm working on just a simple chapter breakdown for the blog page so that people can see if they want to cherry pick a certain chapter, that's fine. Um, so that they know what happened in this portion of the story. But it's getting more and more complicated because there's more and more things going on.
Hmm.
And in order to bring this story forward, some things that need to be included, it's like in any good story, you want to be sure and include as much as possible, but at the same time, you have to keep it on an even keel, and maintain continuity of the story. The story must prevail, and yes, there is an end point to this story. It is not designated to uh, go past a certain time period. It is coming to a close. Probably another, I would say, 5 to 6 chapters, dependent on the volume of the chapters. Some of these chapters might be two-parters. It just depends on the volume of the information that needs to be gotten out. But yes, there is an end to this story. Um, if I survive it, uh, I wish to look into some of the other stories that are pertinent to this planet that were not covered in either of the books. Um, I have my own theory. It's my theory. It's no one else's. The supporting information for it is as thin as it gets. But for right now, I'll just say this: I have a theory of how the pyramids got here, and it is unlike anything anyone is even aware of at the moment, because their purpose here predates the existence of just about any species here you can think of. And so that history goes way back. And so that you can imagine what the lack of archaeological record for support for that is. But um, that's another idea for another episodic uh, production. Um, I also have, a couple of other independent projects on the table at the moment, um, of my own. I have one film project that I basically shelved for the moment because due to financial constraints, I had to stop work on it. And I've got a couple of other projects in mind. But yeah, this book is coming to an end. Um, and I'm going to keep my fingers crossed on this because this is just a projection at the moment, but hopefully before the end of the year. Let's put it there. And the viewers, you can find the Book of Man on Vimeo very easily because you can just Google it or search engine it, Vimeo Book of Man, and it'll come up. If you can't find my blog, the Book of Man blog on WordPress, pretty much everything up to date on there is released information about the chapter releases and status and whatnots. Um, and my YouTube page as well. Also, just in case there's somebody out there with some loose change floating around, donations to the project are accepted. We have a few people in Australia actually recently who have graciously stepped forward and helped me continue this project in the manner that it should be done. And I will be giving big hats off to them on the blog here very soon. And other than that, anything else you can think of, I'd be more than happy to answer. No time restrictions unless you got something burning.
Well, like I said, 2 hours for the sake of all the people of lousy attention spans, so I guess we'll kind of end it at that. But since you did mention the pyramids, you say you never really researched Andrew Bartzis and George Kavaslis. I made it clear on this show, among other shows, they're like my number one and number two sources of info. Bartzis said the pyramids were built 803,000 years ago, and no, even though it seems to fly in the face of what Robert Bouval says about the 10,500 BC thing, it doesn't, and he kind of explains how the pyramids and their association with time makes it not a paradox. And also Kavaslis, he asserts, and I encourage you to check out my private session with him, which you can find on my channel. He asserts he was in the part of the group of people that brought the in a past life, he was part of the group of people that brought the pyramids to Earth, and he knows exactly what their intention is. But I'll just leave it at that. You're more than welcome to check that out. Again, my YouTube channel, Fan of 2012, and I'll be uploading this video to, well, it's already going to be on YouTube in a couple minutes after I log off here because it's live streamed on Capricorn Radio, but I will kill two birds with one stone by also uploading it to my YouTube channel, Fan of 2012, to make sure that this interview gets seen far and wide, and people who don't know who you are will know who you are. And I will also, I promise, upload this interview on some social media sites so the word will get out there. Say you had loads of fun. I had loads of fun too. It was a pleasure having you. Learned a few things here, and look forward to the rest of the Book of Man series. I wish you the best of luck, and take care on your future research and endeavors.
Thanks, Andrew, and it was a pleasure and an honor to be here.
It was a privilege to have you. Take care now. Bye bye.
Bye bye.